Committee this Wednesday afternoon, January 22nd, and we're going to turn our attention to H27. We're going to get an introduction to the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission, and then we're going to get a walkthrough of the bill. And we're starting with Carolyn Hanson, if you can join us and give us a background of the Fatality Review Commission and also the need for H27.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
I'm Carolyn Hanson. I'm with the Attorney General's office, and I've been with the Fatality Review Commission since 2014. So I thought I could start maybe by just giving you guys, and please tell me if you know this and you don't really need to hear that.
Definitely want to hear this.
Okay. Well, I made a couple of notes for you. We have a group right now of 17 commissioners, and these are people from all different backgrounds. And we meet 6 times a year, and we look at domestic violence related deaths. So not just homicide, but sometimes cases we've looked at have been a domestic violence related suicide. And we try to learn from this unimaginable tragedy. If people had any interactions with systems in our state, and are we missing something? Are there gaps that we can identify? Are there things that we could do better? I mean, the purpose behind the commission is never, finger pointing or why did this happen this way? And, trying to figure out what went wrong. Something obviously went wrong. And many, many times we see that everybody who interacted with these individuals had the very best of intentions. But sometimes systems just don't speak well to each other, or there's just some obvious disconnect. And we try really hard to just spend whatever time it takes looking at those cases to figure out if there's something valuable to be learned from them. And we do that by taking testimony, sort of like what you all are doing. We invite people to come in and talk to us. We sit around a table just like this. Some people feel comfortable doing that in person. Some people write us letters, things like that. But we try as much as possible to talk to people. It may be different people. If the police were involved, we certainly talk to them, but we may talk to entirely different people, family members, learn. And often this is the case in cases where there's been police involvement. We learn a whole nother side of what happened. And we go back further in time. We look to where the person grew up and what kind of influences were there and what their family relationships are, just to get a real full picture of things. That's what we do around the cases that we do a review on. We also every year look at just all of the homicides in the state, and we do that with the benefit of the Office of the Medical Examiner. And we look at all of those and we talk about them to see if any of those were domestic violence related. And that information goes into the report that you have. And it just gives you a snapshot of some of the things that are going on with domestic. How often are firearms involved? What are the ages of the people? What are their genders? Were there any relief from abuse orders involved? Meaning, did they turn to systems at any point? So that's pretty much what the commission does. We meet, I think I said this already, but 6 times a year. So it's not super frequent. These are, busy people and they're not being paid to attend. Everybody who's there is there because they have a background of doing this work and they represent different areas of expertise. And so one of the benefits, I was reading a report recently about fatality review commissions all over the country. Do they work? Do they improve things? And it talked a lot about having these interdisciplinary groups and the repercussions of things like that. Maybe repercussions is not the word, but the relationships that are built and the way that you learn. And I've seen that in the time that I've been at the commission. I've seen the way the work that we do and the conversations we have kind of trickle into those different institutions. And that's really rewarding. But the other thing that the report talked about is having leadership and having somebody to champion the things and the recommendations that you come up with. And I have to say, that's where I am so happy to have Attorney General Clark as my boss, who has really championed this. Like Senator Hardy said earlier today, there were press conferences happening around the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Report before Charity stepped in. So that's been really important. And having you all listen and take the recommendations and listen to them and ask questions around them. And so really, I just also want to thank all of you for doing that. And to turn to H27, this is actually not from this year's report. This is from last year's report. So if you're looking at the report itself, it's not the one that came out today. It's the one from last year.
And as I recall, it came out last year, possibly after our drafting deadline, because the second year of the biennium. That's why
Oh, okay.
we weren't able to get this last year or dealing with it this year.
It always, in our statute, it says it comes out the third Tuesday of the first year of the biennium. So we started doing yearly reports, but you all actually only require us to do them every other year. So that's why this last year's report is kind of getting globbed in with this one. And probably there were some deadlines in there, but I'm not familiar with either. But the last time we came to you all and asked for an update in the statute, I wasn't actually there. As I told you, I started in 2014. It was in 2009. And that was to add a judge and to add the a commissioner of mental health. So we haven't been here at the table in a long time asking for any changes in our statute, but we thought it was about time. And really in three areas that we are looking for changes. One is we want to add a sheriff. We think that we have the amazing Chief Burke as our current representative. That is a local law enforcement representative on the commission. We also have amazing support from Vermont State Police. Currently, we have Major Lone, who is our representative. And before that, it was Dan Trudeau, who retired and did an amazing job for a number of years. So we do have law enforcement, but sheriffs, as you guys probably know, are a whole different entity. And I know you've done a lot of work around what the responsibilities and duties of sheriffs are recently. And one of the things they do is they assist people who, it's called a standby. They assist people who need to move belongings out of their home, and there's a court order. And so having a sheriff, because they play that role in a lot of communities. And also, you probably know a lot of sheriffs also do some actual investigative domestic violence work, but their role is just a little bit different. It's different enough that we thought that we really should have a sheriff as part of our group. Did you have a question about that? Oh, okay. You look like you were about to say something. Oh, you look like you wanted to say something, and I tend to talk a lot, so you just stop me.
Too much coffee.
Okay. Okay, so sheriff, that's our first request, is to have a sheriff, and we wanted to be somebody who has a background in domestic violence. And then restorative justice. I know you all have been doing a lot of work around this, and we thought if restorative justice centers are going to be looking at domestic and sexual violence cases, we really should have a specialist and a representative who does that work sitting at the table with us. And then the last piece is for a couple of state-based non-confidential advocates. And only one of them is new. The one that we're asking for is a non-confidential state's attorney victim advocate, we don't have one of those right now. And it's somebody who works closely with the prosecuting authority. And they have a real good nuts and bolts understanding of what cases and what victims go through from the very beginning until the very end. And we thought it was really important to have that expertise as part of our commission. And then we have these other two people, but we have them as alternates. And alternates can go away, right? So we want to have as a designated spot on the commission, the victim services director at VSP. We want to keep our VSP people. We don't want to lose our officer. So we want to keep that person, but we want to have a separate slot for the victim services director. And the same with the Department of Corrections. We have a designated DOC person. And the victim services director at the DOC has been an alternate for the last year or so. And we want to have them both. And we want to make sure that we're transparent and that's who we want to have on the commission. So that's our ask around new people. And if you have any questions about those, let me know. If not, I'll just run through the rest of it. We also are asking the legislature to include a statement about diversity. We think that's really just an important thing to express. You know, Vermont we want to be inclusive and we want to be welcoming. We want people to know that we're intentional about that. And so having you all send that message to appointing authorities saying that we value that and that it's really important. It's really important for survivors, when they come and speak with us to see people that they identify with reflected in the makeup of the commission. And so we just thought it was a really important thing to add. And then the last thing is we would like to expand the types of cases we look at to include near fatal domestic violence. Details of how that will exactly work, we will need to work on as a commission, but we realized that it's a missed opportunity. If we have a case that is a near fatality, it really has all the same hallmarks and same issues that we have with other kinds of fatalities. And we'd also have the benefit of hearing potentially from the survivor. And we have had that opportunity in one or two cases, and it has been really an amazing, it just happened to fit in our current jurisdiction, but it wouldn't always. And we want to make sure that that is something that we can do. So that's what we're asking you all for. Are there any questions that I can answer about either the work that the commission does or just about the proposal that's in front of you?
Sure.
Yes, thank you for being here and sharing these recommendations and laying it all out for us. I appreciate the membership expanding it and really kind of thinking about the current landscape and whose voices aren't there and how can you make sure certain voices stay there. My question is regarding the last recommendation you had about the near fatal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you alluded to it, like you'll have to figure that out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is part of that figuring out like, how do you determine what near fatal means or having I don't know, maybe there is a clear definition of near fatal, but
Yeah.
Is that part of the process you see, or is that a clear definition already exists?
Well, different places have done it different ways. So there are a number of other states that include review of near fatalities and fatalities in their Fatality Review Commission. And some of those do define what a near fatality is. And, we would be open to that. But we also thought that really it's our group that would be looking at it. And it's one of those things that we think that we would know when we see. I don't think the issue about whether we would review the case would be, was it serious enough? It would probably be around something else. We have a doctor that's part of our group, Dr. Birch, and she's amazing. And we were talking about things like substantial risk of death. And she said, well, I don't know if that's a good definition because you could have a pool in your backyard that doesn't have a fence around it. And that could be considered a substantial risk of death. That's obviously not in a domestic violence context, but that's not what we're getting at. We wouldn't look at a case like that. And she said, and from a health perspective, I think of it as from, and I wrote it down somewhere. Let me find it because it was really good what she said. Oh, shoot. I guess I didn't bring it with me, whatever. But it was something like I think of near fatal is the progression from health to death that doesn't reach death. And I thought that's kind of a cool way to think about it. So if that's something that the committee really wants, we definitely could offer some possible language to you. But we also kind of felt like because it's really for us internally to decide, like, we don't take every case. We just take a few cases. I think we would know. I think you'd be giving us enough direction to say something that was near fatal that we would be able to determine if that was serious enough. And if we weren't, we have a lot of expertise on the commission to ask questions about, is that result serious enough that you would say it was nearly fatal?
Thank you for that. And just to be clear, I think having more information is better. So appreciate that. Let's be taking this on. I guess I'm thinking more of like, will you be inundated with cases to review, or you feel like it would be, that's enough guidance? And that, so I'm also hearing you say that you only would look at a few of them, so you wouldn't look at all of them. Is that?
Absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, we realize this could be opening the door to many, many things. We don't want to make promises to people, but we've never reviewed every case. We've always selected a couple of cases. It also takes a lot of time to review a case. I mean, we often spend an entire year on one case. So this would not be a review process that you could say, oh, they're going to review that. They're going to definitely review that case. So whatever current processes exist within a police department or within an agency to do those kind of reviews already. We would not be in any way looking to supplant that. We would be looking at potentially taking a case that didn't currently meet the definition because it didn't result in a fatality, but we thought it was a case that had a lot of value to review.
Okay, so even with the fatal cases, you're not reviewing them each of them in depth?
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful
Absolutely.
to understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's not even the same year cases. So we'll review a case, it could be 5 years ago, it could be 10 years ago. Our statute, and this is for good reason, we like it this way, only allows us to review closed cases. So if there's a case, if it's gone through the legal system and it's on appeal, we don't review that. We've tended to review cases in the last few years that were homicide, suicide cases because there's no prosecution that happens there. And so we were able to review them a little closer in time. And that can be helpful because the processes are often the exact same now as they were at the time of the death. And sometimes we found when we reviewed a case that happened 10 years ago, stuff's changed so much that, it's hard to make sure that you're not already, you're not going back to a point that they've already moved beyond. Yeah,
Thank you for that.
sure.
Yeah, that's a question.
Well, you answered the first one, which was, yeah, so to clarify, yeah, so you guys don't investigate every fatality, domestic abuse fatality resulting kind of case, which means that if you were to inundate with a bunch more cases, it wouldn't be a situation where you weren't now able to review them all. You're not reviewing all of them.
Yes.
So that's good, because I think the concern I had was if you were reviewing all the fatality ones and then you got a ton more and then you weren't able to review all of those based on these new definitions, how would you choose? But I now understand it better. How do cases that how do they come to you to decide which ones to review?
That's a really good question. So we have a case review form. And we've had it for a very long time. And sometimes that's what's available to the public if there's a case that they want us to take a look at. It's on our website at the Attorney General's office. And more likely, though, the way cases come up is somebody, an advocate, perhaps, or somebody in the community or a police officer says, I really think we should take a look at that case. And a lot of the reviews that we have decided to do have come from someone on the commission who thought that it would be an important case for us to spend time with. And thank you for your concern about making sure we don't take on more than we can chew. But as I've said,
Yeah.
we are only scratching the surface. If
Yeah.
we could review every case, that would be an entirely different job and work. And I just wanted, one thing you said was investigate. We don't really investigate. We take the information as it comes to us, and we do reach out and we do talk with people, but I wouldn't categorize what we do as like an investigation. We're basically there to listen and to learn.
Fair enough, and I appreciate the correction. One other, I think I was sort of feeling like, man, I kind of wish we had a definition for near fatality, because I think something as simple as a firearm being involved, that could be a near fatality.
Absolutely.
And that would be a lot of cases, potentially. But do you think that the way, as you described, that cases are sort of brought to you, if there was a definition for near fatalities, would that restrict people coming to you to consider cases that were not fatalities?
I don't think it would restrict people. I think what you're saying, we would look at, is this something that's likely to reoccur? Has this happened other times? So in the case that you mentioned, the example where there was a firearm involved, we might choose to review one of those cases. We might know that there were many, many incidents, and we might ask questions of the witnesses who had exposure to the other cases. How does this fit? Is this an outlier in some way, or does this process occur regularly? So even though we're not reviewing every single case, I think we would make an effort to be mindful of thinking about how frequent similar types of instances occur. And we might very well choose a case that involved, discharge of a firearm, because as you said, that a firearm can be deadly. And, that could have been lethal, but for some other
Yeah.
intervening cause.
Other questions? I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you all
overview.
for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, now a walk through, and I'm sure more conversation about definitions on their favorite instances with Michelle. Thank you for being here, Michelle. Nice to see you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. For the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, and Carolyn teed it up great, so I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add. I will just kind of, since you just are coming off the discussion of the near fatal, it's something, when we first got the recommendation, thought about, talked about with some of the sponsors, and you can define it. But no matter pretty much where you come down, there's going to be some subjectivity to it, right? Because you don't want it to be so specific that it's going to exclude something that the people who are on the commission in their judgment think really needs, some taking a look at. Could we have done things better? How do we improve our policies around that kind of a thing? So Carolyn and I talked a little bit about some possibilities, doing something like near fatal means, substantial risk of death, or, looking at existing definitions in law. I think, as she mentioned, some other states have something. I will just share with you, I don't think it's required in this context. You can certainly do it, and that's at your discretion. But it's different than if we're talking about writing a criminal law, right? Where we must be very specific. We have constitutional obligations with regard to someone who, would be subject to the law. We want to make sure law enforcement is accurately, applying the law. Here, you're really just kind of looking to a group of folks who are experts to say, we want information from you, and you're giving them a lot of kind of breadth to kind of make the determination out of all these different types of cases, which ones are going to be most illustrative of things, that we can learn from and move on. So you can, and I'm happy to work with you on trying to come up with a definition of near fatal, but it's not, the need isn't there in the same way as if we were drafting a criminal statute, right? And it's also self-enforcing, right? In terms of which cases they decide would fit into that, right? Because no matter what, you'll have a standard and say, well, is this substantial risk of death or this or that? And so that's just my little piece on that.
So I have a question, because I know there's the child fatality
Mhm.
commission. So is that something, so I'm just wondering if that comes up in other.
I can certainly take a look,
Okay.
and I don't mean to be obtuse lawyer, but I don't staff that issue. And so I don't know. I know
That's
that there
fine, yeah.
is that, and I don't know if maybe some of the other witnesses might know, but I can take a look and see how they address that.
I mean, I think Carolyn raised a really great point, and we have gotten, I'm surprised that we have not heard from this commission since 2009 with changes, because I feel like we have gotten really important law changes since I've been on House Judiciary for one of the fatality commissions. You need to do that, like it seems like this work can make a huge difference. So it does seem like broadening it, but not overwhelming, is really important.
Right. Yeah, and again, Carolyn brought up something I think is important, something you might want to consider around the report. So when I got the request, I was like, oh, I haven't thought about this for a while. I actually drafted the statute 23 years ago. And there's only been one substantive change, which was in 2010. And the addition of those two positions. There have been other amendments to the statute, but they're, have to do with just like updating boards and, that kind of technical stuff. And so there haven't been, and, they've kind of progressed. I had totally forgotten that it wasn't an annual report, because I knew the annual reports always come in. And so I'd forgotten that. And I have no idea, looking at that language, I have no idea why that language is the way that it was. And somebody must have even given it to me, or something, why it's picked the third Tuesday in January, kind of a thing. And something that, you know, has definitely evolved since the time that that statute was drafted is like when I first started working here, reports, it was like this consistent thing. Reports were always due January 15th. And as things have changed and drafting deadlines have changed and the amount of drafting requests that we get and, you know, how things have evolved, like we hate requests that, I mean, we hate reports that come out in January because as the chair mentioned, usually if it's the second year of the biennium, we've missed the drafting request deadline, or we have to like really scramble to get something in. But in terms of like the Senate, their deadline's already passed. And even for the first time, you know, it's usually helpful to have that prior to the session. People can take a look at it. I mean, it's questionable because some people would say, well, if it arrives in December, nobody's looking at it. But I question whether or not, honestly, anybody's looking at it in January either. You know, for those of you who are new, all the reports are on our website. So if there is a report that's required by the legislature, it could be a standing report, like something like this, or it could be like a summer study or things like that on our website, which I think is really great. And even though I have access all of that all this information through our document management system, I just go to our website lots of times because it's faster and easier for me to navigate. And you go to the legislative reports and the research, and there's a search function. You can search by year. You can put in just one word that you might know that you're looking for, and it'll pop up. So, so as Carolyn mentioned, they just issued this year's report. Was it like yesterday or today or sometime this week?
Or Tuesday, yesterday.
Oh, right, Tuesday, exactly. But you can also see their prior reports as well. You know, once you go, we only started that, I don't know, like doing it that way, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. It used to be pretty inconsistent because agencies would issue a report and then somebody would just walk a hard copy over and that would be it. And we'd hope that it would get into the archives. But now, since there's been, you know, all the technological advances, you can pretty much find all the reports. And there's a standard way that anybody that's required to do a report is supposed to send it to us, and it gets uploaded onto the website, and you can find all of that stuff. So you can go back and look at the work that they've done.
So on the near fatal instances, actually, this may be actually more of a question back to Carolyn. So I'm fine with the what I would call more of a squishy definition or non-definition for what you're looking at. But as far as is the plan to also be reporting the number of non-fatal instances or near fatal instances? Because then I have more of an issue of not having it more specifically defined. If we're going to be year on and year out reporting that and trends on near fatal.
That's a really good point. And no, we would not be able to report that because there isn't a database that collects that, and you would have to have it making distinctions about cases, right? So, yeah, I'm sorry, it won't, our data will continue to track domestic violence related homicides. And the other fatalities you'll see in the report, it says, you know, we certainly try to capture any suicide that we know is related to domestic violence, but most of the time we don't know. And the only way we find that out is the OCME's office decided a while ago they would try to flag a case. If something came into their office that was accompanied by information suggesting it was related to domestic violence so that they could bring it to our attention when we meet with them every year. So it's a very informal system of even tracking deaths that are not home.
So, and that's the Office of Chief Medical Examiner.
Yes.
So if it's not being reported as far as, you know, the statistics part, but it's opening up additional cases you can look into, I personally don't have a problem with it, with the near fatal. I think that's pretty important distinction, that as long as it's not like reporting trends of that. So Ian, Zach, is your hand up or you just?
No.
Okay, Ian.
Yeah, I think then I'm just curious. Yeah, my initial reaction to like an ill-defined term was like, it's pretty strong, but I'm like working my way back. And I'm just curious then, so as I read it, it would be 1140, section A, subsection 1, to examine the trends, patterns of domestic violence related to fatalities and near fatality instances of domestic violence in Vermont. So, and then that's like what the report that they're charged with making at the end. The commission shall, this is subsection G of 20.
Page 5
Oh, page,
Yes.
yeah, oh, that's probably a lot easier, right? Page 6, line 14. The commission shall report its findings and recommendations to the governor. So it's not like explicitly said that they're not going to report findings on near fatalities. Even though we're saying that they're going to be examining trends, patterns of domestic violence related to fatalities and near fatalities. Does like that need to be clarified?
No, because you're identifying up in the front what their charge is.
Yep.
Right? So subsection A is saying, this is what you are to do. And the scope of it and what you're looking at. And then so G is just simply saying, report its findings and recommendations. So whatever is encompassed in A is that what your question is?
Yeah, and if I can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So then it would be, so would it be, if we were to change the statute to read like it is in the red line here, so could I expect in that report for there to be an examination of the trends and patterns of near fatal instances of domestic violence?
Yes. If that is what their findings or recommendations are. But again, you're not being,
Oh,
so when it comes to reports, whether it's like y'all are going to say the House Judiciary Committee is going to look at bail reform, over the summer, and then they're going to this, and they're going to look at these things, whatever, and then they're going to make findings and recommendations. Unless you want to be very, very proscriptive, you generally the kind of formula that is used is you look at these types of things and then you use your discretion to make findings and recommendations on these topics to the governor and the General Assembly. Sometimes there will be very specific directives in there saying, we want to know the exact number of near fatal domestics in 2024, and we want to have that number, and we want to have certain information on that, and that will be identified. But in these types of things, usually it's kind of saying, we have an interest in this area, we want to gather this information. We as legislators, as brilliant as we are not experts in every one of these topics. And so we leave it to the people who are working in this field to sift through all that information and tell us, really kind of cut back, through all the information and tell us what they think is necessary for us to know and to take action on. So again, you can be very prescriptive on things, but I think in these types of things that you kind of leave it and say, this is the universe of stuff we want you to look at. You tell us what we need to know, because otherwise this could just be a committee that works all day on DV issues.
yeah,
Be fine.
that makes a lot of, thank you.
Yeah.
Instead of juvenile justice, that might be nice.
Do you want to change the date of reporting?
Well, why don't I just walk through the bill just real quick and just show you the language? Is that okay? Or do you want to jump?
I want to finish up
Okay,
this
sure.
conversation still, because I guess, I still, do we need to have more assurances that I'm looking at this year's report, looking at total homicides, and there's various statistics. There's the trend data that's showing the number of percent of all homicides that are domestic related, 1994 to 2023. I don't want to see that for near fatals.
I don't think you're not going to see it for just
Okay.
the reason
Yeah,
that
that-
Carolyn, said, is that how do you know? How is that commission going to be able to sift through this aggravated assault or, this, and go through it? Something might be a domestic assault, but actually maybe it actually rose to an aggravated domestic and someone was choked and nearly died, but it was pled down to a small, you know what I mean? Like it's, you can't really, I think, easily gain that information without going into every case.
Right, and I do understand that, and I do understand with Carolyn and the current commission, but next time when we change this again in 10 years or 15 years, I mean, is the commission going to understand that's what we really, our intent here is that we want to expand what they can look at for patterns and look at cases, but we don't want, unless they come forward with a more definitive definition, we don't want to see like data trends for near fatal. I guess I'm just thinking.
I just wouldn't, you can certainly add that. I don't feel it's necessary. If you look at what they're asked to do in subsection 1, it's to examine the trends and patterns, but nothing in here says, report to us the exact number of fatal domestics or, and so like, they're providing you with that information because they're looking at it and selecting their cases, and that's something that they're able to get the data on.
Again, I'm just thinking 10 years down the road, we get a report that they've decided to try to figure out what near fatals are, and they start tracking that data, and it's like, well, we never intended that.
So are you asking whether or not you think it's advisable to have something in there that specifically says you do not need to report
I'm just asking.
statistical data?
I haven't decided what I think on that, but I'm just pressing this issue to probably further than it needs. Now that I'm thinking of it.
I can certainly come up with that
Oh, okay.
if you think, or.
So yeah, maybe I'm getting a little sense from looking at Ian and Angela that maybe we do want to have something in here that maybe it's rather than limiting on the near fatal, kind of just make clear as far as the data that we want has to do with the fatal.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Karen, do you have an idea on how?
Because I do appreciate that. I like started this with all, what is the definition of it? But understanding it more, I agree the fluid piece of it, but with the piece of a future commission not really understanding the of it, they would have previous reports to look at to see what had been reported in the past. So I feel like that would inform them as well.
Yeah.
I could go either way on that, but I just wanted to add that for consideration.
Yeah, I could see the exact same thing happening though, and they look and they say, well, the past commissions have not been in compliant with the statute, because it says here that they need to be examining the trends, patterns, and domestic violence related fatalities and near fatalities in domestic violence in Vermont. Like,
So I think we should just drop some language in there. I think that maybe the preference is going from the data that we want reported has to do with
Do you want an affirmative requirement that they report the hard data on fatals, which you don't require them to do currently in statute, but you want that?
Yes, I think so. I mean, but I will ask Carolyn again to weigh in on this if you want to, or.
I would probably come down on thinking you don't need it. I know that's not the way the committee's leaning, but I mean, we don't actually have any data analyst that works for us. So we're always relying on other sources to gather that data. And so I hesitate thinking somebody, when I'm not there anymore, that feels like it's part of their job to do that gathering of information. We get that information and we're lucky to have such a good relationship with the Office of the Medical Examiner. But I think that they do that to be gracious and helpful. And it's not a situation where they are required to disclose information to us. And we don't have anybody that we could charge with doing that work. So I think it's better to not have commissions like this charged with doing work that they don't have a staff person. I'm no data analyst. When I need something, I ask people at the health department, I ask the OCMA's office, can they help me with that? But they're not being compensated in any way to do that. And I think it's just always good to keep that in mind, that we don't want to look like we're asking people to do things that may be outside of their skill set, and maybe that there is no actual process for gathering.
But I guess I still think that some years in the future, they may bring somebody in to do that, to help the commission. So before I get to Angela, I will just throw out as a suggestion is in page 5 on subsection D, that we just add a sentence that any statistical reports reporting shall be limited to fatal, whatever the language is.
See, may report on.
Well, I think if you say, yes, somehow that language there, because it's, my concern is you don't want statistics on an ill-defined term.
But don't you also think that in the event that somebody came up with some kind of way they were gathering information about near fatal domestic violence and we wanted to report it to you, like, I'd like to give you those
Yes.
numbers. I mean,
Yes.
I tell you, they have to have their own way of doing it, but someone could read that prerogative, that thing in the statute and say, oh, we're not supposed to report on that, which is not what you're intending.
No, you're making my point with that. And if that comes to the point where you now are able to report on near fatal, come back to the legislature and give us that definition that you are reporting. Is how I would say it.
I see exactly what you're saying. I don't mean to argue it with you,
Yeah, no,
because
no,
we
no,
would,
no,
we
no.
would tell you, we
Yeah.
would say, we're basing it on this data, and this is what they had determined to be a near fatal. We wouldn't hide the ball on what they were using to determine that. I'm
Right.
just saying that, like, I don't know, if you guys think it's important, do it, but I don't think you need to, honestly.
Angela?
Yeah, I guess I really am not thinking about the commission of today. I'm thinking about 10 years from now or whatever. And if near fatal instances of domestic violence, the review of such cases becomes routine over the course of time, I wonder if there would be a moment where members of the commission would say, oh, well, we should be, why don't we include maybe there would just be a line of like, the commission reviewed 7 near fatal instances, but not like there were 7 near fatal instances, you know, like, I don't know, we're trying to predict future behavior and
Right.
I don't feel comfortable necessarily doing that, but I was bothered at first by the lack of definition, and then I was not bothered by it anymore. And when I understood that that cases are already reviewed on a sort, you know, that not all cases are reviewed, because my worry was without a definition, cases would be missed. If you're attempting to you know, gather them all. So that's not what's happening. So then I felt better about it. But I hear what you're saying about eventually this new kind of case being reported on in a statistical sense and not having a base or basis, I guess, in which to root that statistic. But I'm sure, yes, the definition would be included at that time. I don't know.
Well, why don't we
Let's
get,
trust the commission.
let's go through the rest of the walkthrough, and then we'll have the other witnesses weigh in on this issue. How about that? And decide then. Don't you love the deliberative process?
Okay, so the bill does 3 things. Adds the consideration of near fatal domestics, adds the diversity requirement, and then it adds 5 new members to the commission. So you'll see the near fatal language that's throughout the document. You look at page 2 on the composition of the commission, you'll see the new language. The commission's intended to reflect communities throughout Vermont, and appointing authorities shall strive to appoint persons from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, persons with a disability, and persons who identify as LGBTQ+. So this is not a requirement. It's more just setting forth kind of a policy of the state, wanting to make sure that the commission is reflective of those people. But you will also notice that a lot of those people are very specific people, right? Your commissioner of health is your commissioner of health, and all the commissioner of health can appoint a designee and may be able to work with that within there. But it's going to be somewhat dependent on who are the people who in those positions who have the expertise. And so that is why it's flexible.
So when we were hearing about the additions, it didn't dawn on me until I digested it a tiny bit, but it feels like with the language that a state attorney's victim advocate appointed by the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services is on here. But we don't have the Center for Crime Victim Services on here, and I think that's a most important entity and to have this Center for Crime Victim Services. Because the state attorney's victim advocates don't even work in that office. I mean, they report to the state attorneys. So we've lost any direct tie to Center for Crime Victim Services. And I know a bill that I put in a few years ago was related to making sure that the spouse of somebody who was murdered could access some of the victim compensation funds. So again, I think making sure we're serving our victims well. I just would wonder about that.
So we can hear from the witnesses on that suggestion.
Okay.
And I'll let you come back up and later to address any other things that come up as well. So the executive director or designee of crime victim services.
Right, especially when we're adding, right, like we're adding, like it's such a scattered array of victim services that we have right now that I would not want to exclude a really key important part of the skill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know if you need me to go through the additions, but you can see those starting at the bottom of page 3 with the new subdivisions 18 through 22. And then if you do want to, can consider on subsection G, whether or not you want to change anything with regard to the reporting, whether or not if they have been doing the annual reports and are okay with doing the annual reports, do they want to continue? Then just talk about once you're talking with the witnesses and think about whether or not they would recommend anything different. And then thinking also about your calendar and how the legislative session works. What would make sense for you in terms of receiving those reports so that you have the ability to take action. I mean, not that you can't, with something coming in and towards the end of January, you still obviously can, but.
So do we leave it discretionary as it is right now, or do we put it into this question?
Well, I would just say statute does not reflect practice. I mean, they are doing practice by being clearly very specific and doing the third Tuesday, but they're doing it on an annual basis. Do you want to have it specific? Do you want to correct it and have it reflect current practice with an annual report? Do you, want to change it so it has a little bit of an earlier reporting deadline? That might be difficult if they are reporting data. In terms of they're looking at a calendar year data, but we do that all the time with DOC and others, and we just do a different look. But I'm just saying, you might, as you're talking to folks who currently sit on the commission, saying, what would be ideal? What do you think is the proper way for you to be communicating, what you're learning to us so that we have the ability to take action on it in a relatively quick manner, if we decide so.
We'll definitely ask the witnesses, and again, we'll have Carolyn back up to weigh on that as well. But Karen.
Thank you for going over this. I just have a question. This might be that there's a difference between work group, committees, commissions. I just know that usually it's like standard language as far as like if somebody isn't a state employee that they can get paid, or how they're going to organize themselves, or like, do we need any of that language or no?
That is your decision. We do kind of have a standard one template when we are creating something new. That is oftentimes because it may include kind of members of the public and who aren't otherwise compensated for doing that work. You can certainly add a provision on there if you would like to. I would say at the time that this was created, it was not necessarily standard, and usually we did those things pretty narrowly focused on back then it was like we used it for legislative working groups, and those used to be pretty much, almost all just legislators who otherwise weren't getting paid to come in June and sit on the committee and talk about these issues.
So there's not a standard, but it's up for us to decide, or maybe get input on if that would be helpful.
I can look, I don't know whether or not somebody who, I can look and see whether or not somebody who, let's say if there's who's not otherwise compensated as a part of their job, is there
Yeah, that was gonna be my
Survivor.
question as well.
so it could be like, if I'm wondering about like on the victim or survivor of domestic violence appointed by the network, like whether or not somebody, because they'd be an official member of the commission, whether or not they would get the per diem that's afforded to people who sit on boards and commissions. And I don't know whether or not you guys know that, Charlie, but I can, we can find that out. It may be that because there is kind of a catch-all for boards and commissions around like a standard kind of payment, and whether or not they put in for that or do anything like that, I don't.
And it's just helpful to know too, that this was created before we kind of started using that standard language. So just decide, do we want to include it or not?
And the additional 5 individuals are all presumably paid as part of their regular job.
Yeah, I
We
would
don't
think
need-
that the vast majority of these people are already being paid on a day job for.
Have to send this appropriations. I guess is the
I
key.
wouldn't think so. But if you did add something like that, then it would go to a post.
That we don't need to. I'm leaning towards not needing to add that. All right. Any other questions for Michelle? Tom, do you have a question?
No questions.
Okay, all right. All right, well,
I have something to say, but.
well, good, all right.
No, not yet. That's very kind.
We'll wait for it.
I'll be
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. And so we'll hear from the network, and Charlotte, please join us.
Good afternoon. I'm Charlie Glisserman. I'm the Policy Director at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of H27. Such fantastic questions from the committee. I will keep it brief, but just say that a member of the Vermont Network has served on the commission since it was created in statute in 2002. And during that time, we have supported the commission's vital work in tracking domestic violence homicide trends, conducting case reviews, and recommending system changes to prevent future tragedies. We are pleased to support H27 because we believe that it will strengthen the commission's work moving forward. This bill would allow the commission to review trends and patterns of near fatal incidents of domestic violence, as you've heard. We feel that these cases provide very valuable insights into opportunities for intervention and prevention of completed homicides. On the matter of data and trends numbers on near fatal instances, I would just say that near fatal instances of domestic violence are very serious forms of harm and require attention, and that if the commission feels that they have data that they would like to share and would be valuable in informing future systems changes, that I would support their ability to include those numbers in a future report. The bill would also enable better representation of key stakeholders by adding new members to the commission and directing those with appointing authority to consider diversity. We feel that this is important. All Vermont communities are impacted by domestic violence, but not all communities are impacted in the same ways. And so we think that those perspectives are very key to this commission and will ensure that it improves systems of responses for all Vermont communities. I thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So I think there were two questions or two possible changes. I want to get your input on that. The
Mhm.
adding the executive director of crime victim services
Mhm.
designee.
I mean, I think that the center provides a really important perspective on this work, but would probably defer to Carolyn or the center on whether they'd like to be a part of the commission.
And also any input on the dates and whether we should actually codify practice of having an annual report instead of biannual.
It's a good question. I would be happy to think on that and follow up. You know, the reports I feel offer really critical opportunities for legislation. And so I think maximizing the opportunity that they are able to move forward in legislation is a good thing. I have not personally served on the commission, so I would probably defer to folks who have a better understanding of their workflows.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Next on here. So Heather. Thank you for joining us. If you just identify yourself for the record and proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Heather Holter and I am co-director of the Vermont Council on Domestic Violence, which is a statewide multidisciplinary group. If you don't know a lot about us, it might be because you used to require us to do a report and then you decided we didn't need to do one anymore. Not that I'm asking for that. Yeah, I was going back and forth about whether I ought to mention that. So the council, we did move into statute quite a long time ago. So we have a relationship that is sort of codified in our statute with the commission. So that I serve on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission, and I also the council very purposefully takes the recommendations of the commission each year and brings it to the council, which is a much larger group. We have 42 members, and we have a direct relationship with the local domestic and sexual violence task forces to really try and take those recommendations and further them and work with the council on coming up with strategies for how to further the recommendation. So we have that very specific connection that I thought would be helpful to know. I'm here to definitely support adding the ability to review near fatalities to our definition. I've served on the commission since 2007. And as Carolyn kind of mentioned, there have been a couple of times where we were able to meet our definition, but also essentially talk to someone who experienced a near fatality. That was because in those particular instances, there was also a completed domestic violence fatality and that other person survived. So I wanted to just share with you that having had that experience, there are things that we learned, no surprise to members of the committee, there are things that we learned from that person about how the responsible party behaved, what they did, what they said, what the pattern of behavior was prior to the attempted homicide that were just really just gave us information we can't get from talking to DCF or talking to law enforcement. So I would just encourage you to make that expand our definition in that way. And definitely also support adding the new members to the commission, as well as some direction around members of the commission representing the diversity of Vermont and the people who end up before us and experiencing these crimes. Yeah, I think everything else has been said. So, but I'm happy to answer questions if you have.
I guess I'll ask any opinion on whether the executive director of crime victim services or designee should be added.
Yeah, I mean, I would, echo what Charlie said about going, to the center to ask that question. I do think that I wanted to share, just for more information, and I don't know how the connection will work because I do realize that the Center for Crime Victim Services no longer supports the state's attorney victim advocates, but I do think if it worked out, if it is possible to do what we recommended, that does allow the Center for Crime Victim Services to make a really educated choice about who they think might be a good representative to the commission. So I think there's real positivity in that. But yeah, I would say the center probably should weigh in on that. I did remember that I wanted to let you know, because I do know that the survivor representative to the commission is compensated by the Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, which is something that the network is not funded to do. We just find the funding. So, and, it'd be possible for the Attorney General's office to compensate that person, but that's kind of how it's evolved recently.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, not a question at all, just, I guess you'd say an opinion on the size of the commission. I've seen it a lot through the years with the commission boards and panels and studies and whatever we do, that the size of the boards keep growing and growing and growing. And the way that, and I'm not going to push back against it, the size of it, but I'm willing to bet the size that this commission could be trimmed back to 7 people, and the other 15 would, to me, would come in as witnesses to give their opinions, and it seems like it would unmuddy the waters a lot by having like 15 less people on the commission. That's just a personal opinion.
We'll have witnesses comment on that as well, if you want to comment on that, or.
So I guess, not to push back against that, but just to share my experience. So the council, which I co-direct, is much larger than the commission. And I think that, so my 2 things I would say about that. Firstly, that when we have a good number of folks, we get, so we're already kind of crunched for the amount of time that we spend receiving testimony. So like what you suggested around, having those folks in trimming it and then having other folks come and testify, that would expand the amount of time that we would need for folks to testify is the one drawback I would see to that. And when we have a good representation or a more expansive representation of folks who might touch the lives of someone who's or a surviving person who either is a family member or, a friend or a professional person, having a really expansive group of folks who know every part of the system is helpful, I would say, because it relieves the sort of burden on others to explain things that we might not fully understand or get other experts in. So I think that's an advantage that I've noticed, I would share. Yeah.
All right, Tom.
Just go back to that near fatal thing again. I'm looking at it and I read all the statutes, and the statutes, it's fair to say, are crafted based upon lethality.
The Vermont statute, yeah.
So so 1st degree aggravated assault 1043 would be like, that's where you're going to generate a lethality, except for possibly line 3 or section 3 of it. But that also could as well. So why wouldn't you just want to examine certain things in 1st degree aggravated domestic assault? Have the ability to do that instead of near death is pretty speculative. I mean, was it because the mechanism was present and there was no injury, or was there an injury and you needed medical attention?
So my thoughts, I haven't looked closely at the aggravated assault statute. And, there's, I think, 8 other states who have near fatality or that term or a similar term in their statute, and different states handle it differently. I think that my answer to that would just be to share, having been on the commission for a really long time. We really take seriously the cases we decide to do an in-depth review of. Obviously, we very carefully look, as Carolyn described, sit with the medical examiner and go through all the homicides that happen, take our definition really seriously about the relationship between the two people when we're deciding whether it's a domestic violence homicide. And I think we would, I'm sure we would take the same care in ensuring that there was enough evidence to really back up that the responsible party intended to cause near fatal or fatal harm to someone before we would do a review of it.
It just seems that, whether it was intended or not, it spun up into something that eventually caused lethality. I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just meant that, and I think what we will be applying, the commission will be applying, and you may want to get Carolyn back on to talk about this, but the commission will be applying what we know, what we've learned over the years by looking at successfully completed, terrible way to say it, domestic violence homicides. We'll be applying that information to looking at near fatalities as well. Just slightly off topic, but just you made me think. One of the things that I wanted to highlight that is, and there's some great studies out there about this, but one of the things we've learned, we've developed lethality assessments, nationally and internationally, and there's a lot to learn about. We know that survivors sometimes really are aware and understand the level of danger that they're in, and sometimes they don't, and can vastly underestimate the danger that they're in. And I think that is one of the really critical things that we can learn by talking to people who survived an attempt on their life. So.
Good, Tom? Other questions? Don't see any? Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Here, thank you. And we'll have Chief Burke joining us next.
I'll be brief.
First off, thank you for having a chair with no arms. Second, good afternoon. Good to see everybody again. Sean Burke, Chief of the South Burlington Police, serve on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. My position on this board is, I believe the exact terminology is, words to the effect of law enforcement official at large. So in terms of the recommendations or what's before you in the bill, I just want to talk about the role of having a sheriff's representative there. I think it's a critical one because sheriffs not only are tasked with court process in assisting survivors in that regard, but also are part of the public safety response in many communities, depending on what town contracts for what level of service. And they have complicated funding strategy that they need to employ in order to provide that service. So they should definitely have a seat at that table. In terms of the recommendations from this year, two things really resonate with me from just providing police service in a community to survivors. And that is the absence of victim advocate for people where the cases aren't charged. So in the event of a murder suicide, when the survivors of that person that committed suicide, when they need to have their house cleaned up, we don't have a resource for them. You're talking about a cop with Google, and we can do better. That's all. We can just do better. And then in terms of the recommendation on the lethality assessment protocol, this is a very effective tool. We use it in South Burlington. It was once really widespread in Chittenden County. The value is tremendous. The instrument, I don't have the most contemporary one in mind, but it was about 6 questions. The final question is, if they score high enough, if the survivor scores high enough, you put them on the phone with an advocate, and the advocate tells them you're at risk of dying. And that's a powerful moment. And that's not a cop imposing that on a survivor. That is a trained victim advocate. And that is something that we desperately need as part of our baseline training that comes from the Vermont Police Academy. And I urge you strongly to consider tasking the Domestic Violence Subcommittee of the council to take this up, identify the appropriate LAP program to subscribe to, have the money to pay for it, and roll it out in the next domestic violence training year, which would be next year. So please just think about that. Happy to answer any questions.
Just very quickly on that, I think I already have somebody from the Attorney General's office who's talking to GovOps or Government Operations Committee, because they would probably do that latter initiative or recommendation from the most current report from yesterday. So I appreciate that. They may be calling you to come in and say the same thing.
Perfect.
It's Zoom.
I'm available.
I appreciate it. Questions for Chief Burke? I guess we had all the questions this morning, except for Kenny. I'm sorry, Representative Wilson.
So, aren't you already doing most all of this? I realize this is a commission, but when you're going and investigating a crime and all that stuff, most all this is being done, right?
So great question. The investigation is done. What the commission really does is studies the systems that should have or could be improved potentially that may have helped avert this fatal outcome. So it's not at all an examination of the quality of the criminal investigation, what went on in terms of the presentation of evidence and how the case was ultimately resolved. This is about all of the systems that are in play to support domestic violence survivors and where should we make improvements for better outcomes.
Gotcha. But aren't we already doing that every time a domestic violence case comes up? Aren't we already looking at how we can make it better?
So again, we as practitioners, we evaluate criminal investigations and we tweak different tactics that we may use in policing. We may identify systems that could use improvement, but it's not a focused multidisciplinary team with the statutory authority to make these recommendations. And you would end up with essentially with, county by county recommendations and practices and not a holistic look at the system.
Which we're going to fall right back into the 14 different state's attorneys that we got, and how they're going to handle stuff. More than likely, people are going to do it their own way. Just me looking outside the box.
Almost out of necessity, absent a holistic view and direction set.
Right? Right. So the other thing I'm looking at, and Representative Burdick already brought it up, all these people that are on this board, and I've already heard testimony that we don't have enough people and paid people and all this stuff, but I'm looking like how far stretched we are and stuff like this. I think we're going to need to, there's a lot of people here. They're already stretched very thin, that are overworked, underpaid, most of them, some of them. And it's like, how are they going to handle any more on their plate than what they already got? That's a huge concern with me. And I'm not saying this bill is not important. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just trying to think in my mind how to implement this, that this is going to work and do more of the job or do a better job than what's already being done, because I have I've been involved in this with a family member that was near death years ago, and it's the support system that it seems to me that we have a lot of them in place. It's whether the victim decides to utilize them. And sometimes getting the victim, or in a lot of cases, what I know, getting the victim out of that space of being so, what's the word? All I can think of is freaked out. That's not what I'm saying, but like in this state of panic, like I know in this one instance, it's blocked right out of her mind. It's totally blocked right out of her mind. What happened? She can't go back there. She can't do any of that stuff. I have to respect her for it, even though that's obviously not what I wanted to do, but you know what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, and I think systems have evolved to put the survivor in the driver's seat. That's what we need to do.
Oh, I love that.
With domestic and sexual violence, we have to be respectful of that. So we can't impose this on the survivor. Right? They have their own process to go through. In terms of like how big this commission is, I'm ambivalent. But I just want to say one thing though. You have to provide the opportunity for the people that want to be at the table. Otherwise, we're excluding people that have touch points on the system. I can't say that what's the proposal? What's the raw number? Are we going 14 to 17? What is it?
22.
From which number? 17 to 22? I don't think that's going to slow down our process whatsoever. The witnesses come in, the questions are asked, the work is done.
No, I get that. It's just a lot of it's already been done. And not that I want to keep pumping him up today, but I mean,
It's hot.
You get what you get with me. But you get 7, you get too bogged down. You know what I mean? I mean, the material is already there and I want to see it followed through. I definitely want to help the victim. And I don't want to get 22 different. Anyway, I'll just leave it there. That's my concerns. That's my concerns, and that's just all I want. That's what I'm going to say right now. I think Oliver said the same, kind of the same thing too. But.
I think it's a fair reflection. I guess I'll just highlight one thing. And again, I cannot be more ambivalent about the number. We're reporting every year. We don't have to. So the work's getting done. The recommendations are being made. Policymakers, you have the information. You need to do with it what you feel must be advanced. Just do it.
It looks good. I want results.
So do we.
No, I didn't mean that.
No.
I want accountability. I'm sick of the lack of accountability.
So definitely look at the report that came out yesterday, and we'll try to make sure Nate, we'll post it as well. Any other questions for Chief Burke? I don't see any, so we'll ask him to go back to the hot seat. That's it. All right, thanks a lot, Chief. Keep yourself feeling safe. Yes, sir. I know it used to be, but that's not his jurisdiction. So several questions for you.
Sure.
So thank you for bearing with us on this.
I appreciate you spending the time on it.
So, starting with the Executive Director of Crime Victim Services or designee, we're going to get an email from Jennifer Pullman, who is the Executive Director, saying that, yes, she thinks that would be good, that she should be on there. Is any objection to us adding?
No objection. My question was going to be checking with them to make sure they have the capacity to do it.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question is, have each of these individuals, and maybe we just have to do it ourselves to satisfy Representative Goslant and others, that do they want to accept this position on the commission? So
yes. And the reason why they're in there is because at various points, like a sheriff came up to me and said, I want to be on the Fatality Review Commission. And I thought it was a really legitimate ask, but I couldn't say. And Sean said, well, I'll step off. And I'm like, no, we didn't want you to step off. We want you to stay. And then Sean's the governor's appointment. So he's the local law enforcement representative. So that was the kernel of the beginning of thinking about coming back to you all was I got that ask. And I've had that ask from some state's attorneys, victim advocates, several of them, thinking that it would be nice to be represented. And we did give that appointment authority to the Crime Victim Services Center because I think they know they have their finger on the pulse of who's doing a really good job with serving victims. States, other people had that too, but that was the thought, exactly what Heather said about having a role in there for them. If they want to play a bigger role and have a representative, we would have no objection to that, but I haven't been approached by anybody in their organization saying that they wanted to be on it. So the ones you have are people who have actually come to us.
Okay, actually, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Barb.
So I did reach out to them when I was sitting here because I was thinking when I saw that they were appointing the victim advocate. And given that they don't have supervisory role of a victim advocate, they may not be able to, I mean, and maybe we just need to hear from Jennifer directly, but they may be overstepping if they are being asked to make the.
So that needs to be department, states, attorneys and sheriffs. So on the state's attorney victim advocate, that needs to change to being appointed by DSAS, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs.
Whatever you all think is the most important. We just want to have the person there, so whoever you think is the right.
And from him, and we can have him in if we need to, but I don't think that. So, yeah, no. So backing up, just I have a question on page 3. Line 20 and 21. This might be a question for, I apologize, but so I don't forget it, for Tom Oliver. There's not a Vermont Sheriff's Association, correct? That's the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs? Okay, so we have, so it's the Sheriff's Association. Yeah. I guess Mark Anderson's the head of that.
Correct.
Okay, right. Gotcha. So that was fun.
And we have them as the appointing authority.
Yeah, yes, you do. Yeah, I just wanted to double check that. It shouldn't have been,
Not all sheriffs belong to the Sheriff's Association, about 50-50.
okay, well. So is that the right appointing authority or should it be the Department of State's?
I'm just letting you know that.
Well, what's, all right.
Yes, I would say yes.
Yes, okay. Okay. So the other individuals have asked to be placed on.
Yeah, or individuals from their organizations have. I mean, I don't know who the appointing authority will actually name, but I can tell you that we've had interest from people who serve in those roles.
Okay. All right, so that was that question. The next question would be, should we codify that you are submitting annual reports as opposed to every other year, or do you want to keep it as discretionary for that second report?
I don't think my office has an opinion about that. I think that really we do this at your pleasure. So, I mean, we found it helpful to do it once a year, and so we've been doing that, but we do that at your pleasure, whatever you think is the best. I don't have an opinion about it. It is a little bit tricky to hear a case and to come up with recommendations. So like if you were moving the date around and we were doing reports quicker, we try to, it is a little bit of breathing room, right? Because we may or may not have finished a case by the end of the year, and we may or may not have recommendations for you, but then we just wouldn't provide recommendations, I suppose, if we didn't have any yet. But it is a lot. And we found that every year I say, maybe we won't have recommendations since we just had those recommendations and things come up, and if they come up, we'll present them to you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, easy.
Well, I'm wondering, sort of answered it, but I'm wondering about the timing, what's the frequency?
Yeah.
Third Tuesday in January, does it? I think the point is, it's important to point, that the first year of a biennium, that's still fairly convenient. But second year, we don't have a lot, I think the deadline for bills might even be just around that time or close to it. I can't remember. So anyway, just in terms of formulating bills that might come out of recommendations, it seems like December might be a better due date, but I wonder what the commission thinks about that.
Yeah, I mean, the first year that we did that, it would be trickier because we would have less time for the report. And after that, it would probably be the same. So again, I think whatever fits your process the best is what we would like to do.
Maybe I should ask, there's a question that there's an assumption built into my question. And so I'll ask the question, has the commission ever felt like, gosh, I wish we could get this piece of legislation in for this year, but it's in this report, so it probably won't happen until next year. You know what I mean? Has there ever been a frustration with the timing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we don't meet, like I said, we don't meet really, really frequently. So it has been kind of a big thing, getting a report out once a year. It's a lot. And so I wouldn't want to try to do it any more frequently than that.
Yeah.
But if you all wanted to change around the date, we'd find a way to make that work. And I don't think we've ever been in a position. I mean, Heather, do you feel like, it always takes time. We know when anything is a legislative ask, it's always going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. But I don't think that's been an obstacle for us thinking about, oh, too bad this isn't until next year. Yeah. No, we just appreciate that you're hearing from us and that you're interested in this. And if it's okay, I thought I might answer your point about, is that okay, about the number of members?
The question is, are you getting bogged down with all the members? I forgot to.
No, actually, you're absolutely right in your point that I think there's a sweet spot, because right now we have conversation, and that conversation is the most valuable part. Hearing from witnesses is very, very valuable, but that's what's used to inform our conversation. And if you only had 7 people on the commission, you're not going to have those witnesses around for that conversation. Witnesses come in and give us information and then they leave. And so you're not getting that interchange. And what I found to be the most valuable thing about fatality review is the people in the room listening. They bring back different ways of thinking about a situation to their organization. I think their time is very well spent. And I think if you asked anybody who'd served on it, they would say, I never felt like, why do I have to go to that meeting on Monday? I don't really want to go to that meeting. And I can tell you, I go to a lot of meetings where I feel that way. And so I very seldom have people, I've had people say, I'm getting really, really busy. I'm not sure that I can, or I'm retiring. I've had people resign, but not very many. Most people stay until someone new is appointed from their organization. And I think that's because I was curious about your point. This is connecting to your point. You were saying, isn't this already being done? And my question for you is where?
With the reports, with the crime reports.
Like when there's an investigation by police?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I was trying to figure out what you were referring to. We also look at cases that don't have a criminal response. And we also learn things that maybe weren't particularly pertinent to the police response, but are very pertinent in terms of further prevention in the future. And I know it probably sounds like, how can those two things be true? But they are, because sometimes you learn, like the example you were giving, where somebody is like, there are services available, and if they don't necessarily want to partake in those services, things aren't going to change. Sometimes it's peeling back the layers to understand what are the barriers in using services that are available to you that can help to broaden the reach of those services. We would never impose them on someone, but sometimes we have to peel back the layers to understand, if we have these great things out there and people aren't availing themselves, then we need to sit back and ask ourselves why, and do it in a way that is non-threatening and allows people to explain where they're coming from. And I've learned so much. I mean, I did these cases for years and years and years, and I did sometimes feel like, isn't there somewhere that is working on improving this? Because I would do the case, I'd do my very best job, and I'd close the file and I'd need to move on to the next thing. There was no place for me as a prosecutor to go and talk about, like, I'm seeing this over and over again and it's not working. And there wasn't time to have those conversations. And the thing I love so much about this commission is that we have time to have those conversations and really examine how things are working. It's the criminal process, but it's also way beyond the criminal process in cases that never touch the legal system. And I don't know if that helps with the point you were making.
It's getting the victim to come forward so you can peel back the layers, right? And then the other thing is when again, all the investigative work is being done, I mean, you're constantly, anybody that is in tune with this is learning, thinking how they're going to get better. And we have so many different places already available. And again, this is a serious situation, but I just want to make sure it's utilized to its full potential. And I think a lot of it, I'm just going to touch back again, I think a lot of it is probably already being done, But if that's what's needed to accomplish a little more, I don't think I have a problem with it. I just want to here's what I want to say. I want to make sure it's successful. I want to make sure it's worth everybody's time to go above and beyond your limited amount of time, what you already have, to do this job above and beyond what's already being done. That's probably as good as I can ever say anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I hope that everybody that's in the room feels like their time is being well spent. That's the vibe that I get, that they feel like this time is well spent. Because there aren't a lot of places to talk about how process works and to break that down and to hear and to listen. I mean, you know, a lot of times victim advocates have told me that when a terrible tragedy like this happened, one of the things they offered to the family was, you know, we do have a fatality review. And we've had a lot of family members reach out and say, I would like to have that process, you know, and it gives them a place and a space to talk about what happened and to have somebody listen and to learn, you know, things that nobody really maybe picked up on along the way. And we learn from that, and everybody at the table learns from that, and they get better at their job, whatever it is they do. I think people get better at their job for having had the opportunity to listen to someone's story. I don't know if I answered your question, but I feel like 22 people, it's getting to be a lot of people in the room, but I think they're all offering a very different thing. And I worry about the same thing you worry about. I want to make sure that we continue to be able to have good conversation. Everybody in that room feels like they can offer something and talk. It's not one of those meetings where I'm talking. I sound like I talk a lot, right? But I don't talk all the time in those meetings, and everybody is participating. And I'm not in a lot of meetings where everybody is talking and everybody kind of has, maybe they come at it from a different angle, but they're all looking to do the same thing. We figure out the things that we can agree on, and then we try to build from there, you know, and the things that we agree on and what we can learn from them and what we can offer, you know, to you from what we've learned.
So one can go on to the legislative reports and put in domestic violence, and you'll find the reports from the commission back to 2011. And if you just even thumb through those, you see all the good work that they've been doing. So,
but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the work is being done. And this is the commission that is doing that work. And if the commission says this is going to strengthen the work, that's great. So thank you very much. We have a little more time, so we'll have a little more discussion. I'd like to kind of understand where people are with this. I will just throw out for discussion, the one issue that we've been bouncing around a lot is whether we have a definition or the issue of near fatal. Just thinking a little bit about it. It seems to me that if they start collecting data on near fatal and are going to provide it, that they will provide a definition. I will put some faith in a future legislature that's looking at this report every year, that if that starts coming in and that definition doesn't work or doesn't make sense, that, you know, we're going to have them in front of whatever that future committee is and saying this is problematic or it's fine. So I'm kind of fine with where it is now, kind of playing this out here. But I'm open to push back on that viewpoint. Karen?
I support that as well. I think it was helpful to have the conversation and hear that, especially hearing that the commission, they don't feel that it's necessary now. I feel like there are reports to look from. And I do feel like this is reviewed on a regular basis, that it can be addressed as it comes up, as other reports are coming out. So I feel comfortable with it. However, if everybody else was like, no, we need to, I feel like it could go either way, but I don't see the need.
So I've
Yeah,
said,
Tom.
I'm comfortable with it. Like the view, I'm interested to see what the definition is going to be.
Okay. Okay. You're fine with that, Pam, or were you just raising your hand to weigh in? Oh, you too. Is that what that means? Peace.
So, you know, I've been a police officer forever, and then when I started, nothing was really done about domestic violence. Sometimes someone was just removed from the residence, brought to detail. It all depended on what happened, but it's come leaps and bounds from where it was. It's much more effective and efficient, but I think, with a little tweaking, it can maybe be better. And this is probably where you would get it from.
I think I am just trying to understand the methodology of this and whether statutes should be evergreen. And it's hard to, and I want to just be really clear, I completely support all of this work, and I'm literally just talking about a little bit of language in here, and it's still definition.
You're such a lawyer.
Well, it's just. Why I'm not okay with it is because if I was not on this commission or this committee, and I was a random Vermonter who just happened to pull up this statute, read the plain language of the statute, if we were to amend it in this way, and then pulled up a report and didn't see trends based on data and patterns based on data if I saw that on fatalities, but I didn't see that on near fatalities, near fatal instances of domestic violence, then I would be I don't know why I would be doing this as a random Vermonter, but I would be kind of why isn't that happening? I just and I guess I understand all of the argument around, well, look at what the committee's been doing in the past, look at all these things, but it's is that kind of how we write statute? Or should we be writing statutes so that the plain language of the statute is actually saying what's happening? So that way there isn't any room for, or there's as little room for mistake or need for interpretation that's not actually written.
Right. So you make good points. And I think Michelle kind of certainly hit on, if we were establishing criminal liability.
Yeah.
Absolutely would need to define those. So the other thing I would expect, and we can revisit this next year when we see the report, when we see the report, is I would hope that the commission, when they establish this, would explain the near fatal, what they're doing with it, that there's not data, that it's not being captured. So there's some faith in the commission or the task force or the agency that they're going to do the right thing. And that is certainly a concern. If all of a sudden they're dealing with near fatal, they ought to say something about it, the first report that is going to be on it.
Yeah.
And if they don't, it's like a trust and verify kind of situation. It's up to us to give them the flexibility that we want, not tie their hands. And that's kind of the balance we have right now, not tie their hands, but then check on making sure that they are exercising that authority that was given them appropriately. So that's kind of where it's a close question. It's a very close question, though.
And I would say, unfortunately, I'm a new legislator, so this question, I'm sort of learning this on your question. It's not really as much about, it's more about thinking about legislative interpretation and writing laws and I guess I do hear that it's not that we're criminal that we're writing, so it doesn't mean, but at the same time, it's we're sitting here, we're considering it right now. Why leave it vague if it's, and it's so, or yeah, so I get it, and I think what's the actual risk here? The risk is that you're investigating and looking into more domestic things that maybe somewhat the risk is good. It's there's no negative outcome here of where the work being done by this group is incredibly important. So it's I get that, but if we're putting we're trying to have good practice.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to, now, I think the right decision is to purposely be vague because they're still working on it.
Yeah.
So it has to be a conscious decision.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's because of how much we dug into it. It is a very conscious decision. We kind of heard, and so you may not be comfortable with that. But that's kind of, at least that's how I see it. Anybody else want to?
I feel comfortable with it now that we've gone through it.
As comfortable as you'll feel.
Karen.
No, and that's where I think it's great to have the conversation, to understand all the sides of it. I agree, I'm a rule follower and have all the detail and stuff. And it's also hearing those that are most closely, for me at least, affected by it. like what their perspective is important too. So I hear that piece, and maybe it is because I've been around. I'm like, that's fine. You know, if it is on something that, like, there's a lot of stakeholders that would like, maybe it's a comfort thing. And a trust.
I mean, I think, you know, we can see, we're gonna see at least this committee as it's currently constructed. We'll see one report presumably, if they're gonna do annual reports still, that we can take a look and check the work, you know, as this is expanded, as will future committees, because we always look at this report, you know, every year, you know, and we do work from it. You know, we're gonna have a couple bills from this latest, so that's kind of where I guess I am, yeah, but.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that for maybe to try to help you feel a little more comfortable in is that I would say that this is an exception, not the rule in this committee, that in my limited experience, 2 years, like to define things.
Yeah.
And so I understand your discomfort, and this is a little bit outside of, like, this jumped out at me the first time I read this draft, like a couple months ago. I was like, well, obviously we have to define near fatal, you know, like, and then hearing, like Karen said, hearing from the people who actually are doing this work and understanding how they're going to use it. And that, again, my concern was that without a definition, some cases would be missed, but it's not. I'm trying to gather all of the cases. And so all the reasons that I would really push for a definition have been satisfied in my mind. And I would expect to see a definition in a report. If a report is going to mention near fatal instances, I hope that there will be an explanation in the report.
But if there's a definition, then it needs to be put into the statute then afterward, right? Like if they're gonna start using our definition of a near fatality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it gets developed, absolutely.
Yeah.
This, even though it's been, what, 10 years or whatever, other statutes and other things we work on are much more iterative.
Yeah.
And so make a note to yourself to make sure you look really closely at next year's report. So I have two changes that I'm going to ask for as a amendment to this. One is adding the executive director of crime victim services or with me. We're going to have an email from Jennifer Pullman saying that she very much does want to be part of this. And then also changing, that's page 4, line 5, 6, who appoints the state's attorney, victim advocate to the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs. And I have confirmation in email, which I can also put online from Tim Leaders saying that is correct. So those are the two things I have. Anybody want to have other things added or discuss a little further, Karen?
I just wanted to confirm on the report, so it's on page 5. Like, I see just leaving it as is. I don't see the need to go to it because we're seeing it every year, but it seems like the commission, if there was some real change that you want to make sure, you would probably motivate to get it to us every year, but that giving you the discretion to go 1 year, 2 years. So I see leaving it out too. So I feel like that was an open piece.
And especially because I think the second year, like this bill is based on last year's report. And I think that will always be that way anyway. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, it's not.
Well, that's my question, not the frequency, but the timing.
So they could, I mean, they almost could just, it's every other year at the beginning of the biennium. That's the key part. So if this, because I'm going to get in bill requests from this most recent report, and we could be adding this bill request at the same time, but we already did. I don't know. But yeah, Angela, you had.
Well, that's what we could have been working on those bills for the last 4 weeks in some form or you know what I.
Oh, so moving it up from the third.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's necessary, but you've been here a while. What do y'all think? Like, in terms, just.
If that's what the committee wants.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
And I'm hearing that the commission said they didn't necessarily see the need and that it actually could put extra pressure on them to have to do that, that might mean like a meeting that they miss because they could be in December. Like, again, I feel,
Year only.
I just feel like I have faith in the commission that has the report when we need it in a timely manner. If they're like, this is stuff that needs to be introduced right away, they'll get it to us.
One thing I've seen through the years, sometimes, maybe not in this exact situation, is sometimes deadlines and dates have been put on things that it just ends up not being enough time for people. And being a little open-ended, I guess, would give the time. And one of the things that really sticks out in my mind was it Irene, was it, that wiped out the hospital?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
yeah.
So we rebuilt that system when I was in human services. And we had when they were building a new hospital, we went through all that, and they had a couple gentlemen come in that were gonna be tasked with staffing the building. And they said they needed this much time. And and this is always stuck in my mind for timelines. I specifically asked, do you have enough time? They said, yes, definitely. They came back in the next year and said, we need more time. So that's always in my mind as far as timelines go.
And it's our timelines that I'm thinking about. And I know that like the commission's timeline is the most important timeline. This is not open-ended, not later than the third Tuesday in January. I mean, I guess that's somewhat open-ended, but I'm saying this as someone who's thinking about the report that we have now that was released this year. And I'm like, I would have requested that bill, you know, everything that's in there. So we're losing a year every year. Put losing a year of action in some ways. Because it's a January deadline.
But that would,
Sometimes.
but if we move the date, then we would gain 1 year, but after that, we would still be on the same time.
No, because the first year they would have a shortened timeline by about a month. But then we'd be on this December report thing and we could be working on bills before the session and all.
So my main issue on this one is that it seems to be working well
Okay.
and we haven't
Just fix all the problems.
we haven't missed opportunities. We haven't missed opportunities. It's my understanding. And so.
Okay.
I mean, is it too late right now to track bills?
No.
But next year it will be.
Yeah, but that would be changing. That would,
So there's a different deadline for the first year or the second year of the biennium.
First year of the biennium is much later, by a few weeks, like, you know, so
right.
in a short term, that's significant.
And so your argument is like move it to December, second Tuesday, whatever, some point in December. So that way, no matter which year of the biennium you're landing on, there's sufficient time to draft legislation.
Yeah.
There's always an opportunity to have a committee bill as well.
There is an opportunity to have a
I
committee.
feel like there's a lot.
There's a lot.
I hear the piece of it, but I feel like I'm with the boat of like, it's been working. There's many opportunities. And if there was a really significant issue, we'd be hearing about it.
Yeah.
So we're good.
But it's my fault. I'm not worried about it.
All right, so we're good. So I'm actually gonna ask for 10 more minutes of, I wanted. That's
up to your speaker.
Oh, right, we're supposed to end at 10 minutes, but we're gonna just, one last thing. Has everybody had a chance to look at the email that I forwarded from Trevor regarding Budget Adjustment Act request?
Not yet. I glanced at it.
Okay, so folks could look at that. And just to be clear, most of it is in the budget request of the governor. The only two things that are in addition is removing the sunset for the marriage license fee for the domestic violence and sexual violence fund. And
We had a street on that?
what's that?
We had a sunset?
Yeah, they somebody down in the Senate put the sunset on it. We didn't have the sunset from here.
You've seen the governor's budget and you know this is in there?
The BAA.
The BAA, the Budget
The
Adjustment Act, that what I sent, everything except for the last two items. The other item is just creating the position for the Attorney General's office. No money is attached to it now. There will be a money request for next year, but they have the funds. They just need to have the position staff. So those are two things that are in addition to what the governor has. I mean, we can object to what the governor has in his as well, if we wish. But I just wanted to distinguish that. And I do want to.
Those two technical changes.
Yeah, there are two technical changes beyond what the governor has. Personally, I looked at it, it all looked fine to me, but I want to have a straw poll tomorrow. I'm going to try to put together a very brief memo to the Appropriations Committee of our recommendation that we either agree with what's before the Appropriations Committee, or if there's something else that we want to add, think about that. And we can talk and find some time tomorrow, somehow. Go over that, but I guess in the afternoon, probably we'll do that. You look like you have questions. Good.
No questions.
Okay. All
A
right.
lot of thoughts.
All right. Well, good. So we'll